as part of the Great Lakes Tour to be here starting with July the 25th, '03, and we'll be here till August the 14th at Navy Pier. Here in the village, the regional knowledge is going to be
to begin, this is a listing of some of the strategies for locating and researching early black churches. Some years ago, while on another trip, I discovered an impressive building, the Bryan Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. This large congregation was founded by a slave in 1788. The Bryan Baptist Church, first known as the first African church, believe it or not, is still active. Surprised and delighted at this treasure, I became concerned about locating other early black churches and began to make tentative inquiries as to names and locations of early congregations. Our ancestors had assembled under very difficult conditions. And through the explorations of our church records, we can find more evidence of these achievements as an ethnic group. We cannot permit these priceless records to perish. Part of our legacy to our children lies in the record of the achievement of our predecessors. Each of us has an obligation to recover our family history. We need to know where we've been to chart goals for our future. Can't let the infamous stereotypes of watermelon-eating scrawny figures, handkerchief-headed clown, the minstrel figures promulgated by those who desire to keep us unaware of the contributions we have made to the progress of this country, whether peace or war. We can't let them destroy our true contributions to the history of the United States. The purpose of my presentation this morning is to give a chronological explanation of the steps our association, the Afro-American Genealogical and Historical Society of Chicago, and its committee members, the steps that we have taken to develop our project. Black churches played a central role in our history, and church records can be of great value. We intend to use our discoveries to promote the study of our history as African Americans. Our project is tentatively titled, A Brief History of the African American Churches in the United States, established prior to 1930. Although the details are still being refined, we're creating a database which would ultimately include short histories of the earliest black churches listed by denominations in each state. However, in order to explore such a broad topic for publication, it was necessary to determine whether there was support among our members for this very expansive, detective-like project. As genealogists, we are aware of the need to search diligently for even the tiniest clue so as to uncover the fragmentary history of our family's past. Documentation of each so-called fact is crucial to proper recording and sharing. The churches offer a unique resource as we set about to locate our ancestors and identify their roles in the advancement of our country. I'm sure that the Friends of Amistad are well aware of the great need to uncover and publicize the achievements of our ancestors so as to encourage our youth. To celebrate Black History Month, too often popular commentators bring forth the same list of outstanding black figures year after year after year. The belaboring of the same people in the same institutions of color over and over, to the neglect of our many unsung heroes and heroines and local institutions, is unfair to all of us. We must commemorate those of our ancestors who fought to promote our progress in a very restrictive society. Sometimes the only records of their births, marriages, and deaths are found in early church records. Sometimes many other types of records can be found in church records as well. Churches promoted literacy, opened soup kitchens, formed burial societies, organized voter registration, and struggled for the abolition of slavery and Jim Crow. We need to call attention to the efforts of individuals and small numbers of African Americans who tried to open doors, to forward equal opportunity, to move away from slavery toward a more fruitful lifestyle, better housing, better employment, better education, and fuller lives. We can enrich and sustain the difficult struggles of the present by reflecting on our history. In order to illustrate the achievements of our ancestors, we need to research these evidences of our culture stored in church archives. It would be criminal to let these precious materials be lost. I know some of this is a repetition to members of the archives, but I'm hoping to reach those who are not, to encourage joy. Church archives are records of our past, and again, we can recover some of the missing facts through searching church archives. In our early churches, we created our own rituals. We took the opportunity to exercise self-determination, to develop leadership qualities. In these institutions, we combine religious rituals from African ancestors with those found in this country. We developed musical talents that were unique. Concerns for the future of our children were ever before us, as well as exploring options for entrepreneurship and employment. Above all, there was fostered a sense of unity among our ancestors, slave and free. One necessary means of capturing and preserving our culture, our history, is through preservation and publication of African American church archives. In the past, churches were often vulnerable to attacks by the Klan, and many Baptist churches encouraged ministers to take records with them when transferring from one post to another. Such procedures led to haphazard storage of documents. Instead of being sent to and stored in denominational headquarters, individual ministers kept the records. So, upon their death, records were often lost. In later years, some larger denominations made efforts to preserve, record remaining information about member churches, but they missed many detailed aspects of individual church programs. Knowing the need for collecting, preserving, and publicizing early church archives, and an interest in promoting such information, we felt the need to broach this topic before our society. We wonder, is the time right to approach the African American Genealogical and Historical Society of Chicago? Would the members accept the challenge of such a vast undertaking? Fortunately, we had already completed a major publication, and enthusiasm was high. For several years, our society had been involved in collecting and publicating records from a cemetery project. Under the direction of an inspired member and society research tools, we approached Lincoln Cemetery here in Chicago for records of very early burials. We found most of their records were fragile, unintelligible, unavailable. Thus we began the extensive project of recording all of the tombstones in the older section of this black cemetery, which was founded about 1907. Not sure exact date. We trudged through row by row, section by section. We recorded each name on each tombstone, along with dates of birth and death given. Sometimes military information was inscribed on the headstone. This project took teamwork covering several years. We met in the cemetery early on Saturday mornings under the direction of Mary Thompson, and amidst the drudgery, we had several interesting experiences, including the glimpse of a coyote in the distant woods. We said, we just stay over there. Afterward, we'd meet for lunch and discuss our programs. Actually, the cemetery was a very lovely place, well kept, with beautiful monuments placed about, graceful old trees, all of which stirred memories of loving relatives long gone. Upon completion of each recording session, individual schedules provided by each team member were entered into a computer database. The resulting book, an index of headstones in Lincoln Cemetery, Chicago, by the Alabama Study Group of the Afro-American Genealogical and Historical Society of Chicago, was published by Heritage Books in 1999. It lists more than 27,000 headstones. Excited about our success in this publication, a suggestion for a new project caught the attention of members of our genealogical society. The idea of recording information about the earliest black churches attended by our ancestors and the hope of locating further information about our kin ignited interest. Because of the inherent difficulties in locating information about early slave ancestors, this prospect opened up another avenue of research. Slaves were identified only by numbers in pre-Civil War census records. They were counted just like farm animals in agricultural schedules. When the estates of slave owners were probated, some of their wills described slaves by name, approximate age, and other physical characteristics like color, stature, and scars. Of course, these descriptions were to ensure that each slave was given to the correct beneficiary of the deceased's will. However, it is known that some churches, both black and white, kept records of early baptisms, marriages, burials of African Americans, slave and free. Now, the question was, where are these churches to be found? How can we locate them? We could start with plantation records or with records collected in urban centers. Early city directories, these are pre-telephone directories because they didn't have a telephone, sometimes included black churches designated by a code or the word African or Negro. Following the development and formation of the various states of the Union, going from the East Coast westward, gives some indications in determining the ages of the early churches. As one might expect, the earliest churches were located along the eastern seaboard. At the beginning of our society's research, we determined to include each and every black church, whether it was still active or not, whatever their denomination, whether a church had 20 members or 200, it would be included. The first group of worshipers probably met in bush or brush arbors. According to early records, these were located in fields some distance away from plantation centers. Some early churches were founded in secret, permitted gathering slaves an outlet for their misery and a chance to share their few joys. Sometimes slave owners hired whites to check on their form of worship to make sure they didn't get any idea of conduct above their station in life. Some plantation owners encouraged the use of the Bible, but their peculiar interpretation of its meaning was a device to keep the enslaved under control, to promote a belief that slaves would be rewarded in heaven for their labors on earth. It didn't happen. In these early gatherings, probably under trees, cooler than in open fields, the slaves began their own interpretation of the lessons of the Bible. Similarly, in urban areas where some blacks had earned their freedom by manumission or by flight, free blacks established their own congregations. Blacks, freed and enslaved, had been allowed to attend white churches, although they were often relegated to balconies or less desirable areas in such institutions. Religious instruction was often confined to encourage slaves to mind their masters willingly, accept their condition of servitude. Since all African Americans were not slaves, some free blacks had established their own churches. And for a few years after the introduction of blacks to the colonies in 1619, Africans were indentured just as whites. But in a short time, about 30 years, the rules of slavery were codified and slavery became a lifetime condition from generation to generation. One of the denominations founded as a result of the segregating practices in white churches was that of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, known as the AMEs. Black members, led by Richard Allen, broke away from their white church about 1795. Other denominations like the Colored Methodists and some Baptists had similar experiences and separated from parent bodies to set up separate institutions. During January of this year, our society began informal meetings in my home, exploring the possibilities of various types of research. At first, we concentrated on churches of our ancestors, and in each regular meeting of our Afro-American Genealogical and Historical Society, we collected information about churches of our members. Early on, and their ancestors. Early on, we decided to limit this project to the earlier churches founded before 1930. Thus, churches would be at least 75 years old. Some were as old as 200. A quick check of the Chicago City Directory listed over 500 churches in this city alone. Some very recent, others of great age. As our collection grew, we found churches located all over the United States, wherever ancestors migrated or were dispersed. Then we realized that the scope of our project would have to be broadened. The next step of this exciting search began at Woodson Regional Library, 95th and Halsted, with the assistance of Director Dr. Miller and Dr. Fluke. These kind gentlemen provided a workroom and suggested likely sources of information. Starting early this year, we began meeting in the Harsh Collection's private room about every 2 weeks. A tentative research of WorldCat, or OCLC, led to several lists of books, articles, and films relating to church history issues. By combining these lists with books, about this time we decided to concentrate on earliest churches of the state of Illinois. For the first phase, our information is still incomplete. We have already located